Since contracts play a big role in this phase, let's try and understand more about architecture contracts and how it should be used pragmatically. An architecture contract is a joint agreement between three parties: the architecture capability, the system implementers, and the business sponsors. In fact, the statement of architecture work, which was created as part of Phase A, is part of what we refer to as the architecture contract. However, architecture contract in Phase G incorporates all further updates that occurred along the way as the architecture was developed and then subsequently transitioned over to the implementation teams, and it narrows down the contract to the concerns that are specific to a given implementation and the architectural outcomes and business values that are expected from that initiative. It needs to be noted that although contracts serve a purpose to safeguard the interests of the parties involved, and it clarifies many aspects which otherwise could remain ambiguous and subject to interpretations, contracts, when enforced too rigidly and literally, can also have a negative effect of potentially driving out possibilities for creative problem solving, innovation, and hence could potentially become a stumbling block or a hurdle to exploit or address emergent business opportunities or threats. Ideally, the contracts should function as a guideline and framework to enable effective collaboration, communication, and decision making among the three parties to enable implementation of the most acceptable and pragmatic solution that delivers the intended business benefits. We have also repeatedly said at various points in this course that one of the key objectives of architecture governance is to ensure conformance of the developed and deployed solutions to the proposed architecture. What exactly do we mean by architecture conformance, and how exactly is this measured? Architecture conformance is a measure of the extent to which a given solution or project has adhered and aligned itself to the proposed architecture while implementing or deploying the solution. The typical criteria by which architecture conformance is measured include provision of stated business functionality and delivery of the intended business benefits and value, extent to which enterprise architecture principles were adhered to, the extent to which solution supports the stated strategy, the extent to which future target state is enabled and supported by the solution, alignment to enterprise architecture standards and guidelines. Compliance reviews happen at various points during the architecture development, implementation, and deployment, and its intention is to catch any issues as early as it can and provide feedback and help initiate corrective measures at the earliest. This prevents a lot of rework and expensive fixes at a later point in time. It also helps uncover any unrealistic architecture expectations and hence can therefore lead to architectural changes as well. Typically, at the end of the architecture evaluation, at a given point in time, the solution is identified to be in one of the following states of conformance: irrelevant, consistent, compliant, conformant, fully conformant, or non-conformant, where irrelevant implies that the implementation has no features in common with the architecture specification. Consistent implies that the implementation has some features in common with the architecture specification, and those features that are common are implemented in accordance with the specification. However, some features in the architecture specification are not implemented, and the implementation has other features that are not covered by the specification. Compliant implies that some features in the architecture specifications are not implemented, but all features implemented are covered by the specification and is in accordance with it. Conformant implies that all the features in the architecture specification are implemented in accordance with the specification, but some more features are implemented that are not in accordance with it. Fully conformant implies that there is full correspondence between architecture specification and implementation. Non-conformant implies that in any of the above in which some features in specification are implemented, but they are not in accordance with the specification. Based on this evaluation, various corrective measures could be identified and incorporated into the requirements of the initiative to take it forward and bring it closer to the intended target state for that implementation. Next, let's briefly look at the inputs and outputs of this phase. The key inputs for this phase of ADM include the corporate IT and architecture governance framework operational within the enterprise, request for architecture work, statement of architecture work updated for any changes, architecture roadmap, implementation and migration plan. The key outputs from this phase include primarily the deployed solution that are compliant, which is what the entire process is driving towards. And to support this objective, we also create architecture contract, which is then agreed and signed by the parties involved, specifically the architecture function of the enterprise, the business sponsors, and the implementers. Compliance assessments, change requests where architectural changes may be required, and an operations framework that would enable effective operations of the solution.